Armored Republic's mission is to equip free men with the tools of liberty to protect their God-given rights. With that goal in mind, we've created a new product identification framework to make the world of body armor easier to understand for both the new customer and the experienced professional alike. To help you quickly identify the right armor for your needs, we now have 4 categories of armor products, each named after the material used as the strike faces of that line. Our S Series, A Series, P Series, and our C Series. For example, our S Series armor features products with a soft strike face, the functional surface of the armor that handles the initial impact from a projectile. All S Series soft body armor products are made using ballistic fabrics, such as aramids like Kevlar. Soft armor is typically the only type of armor that's flexible. It's also the best choice for concealment under normal clothes. Hard armor plates with higher protection ratings capable of stopping rifle rounds are usually heavier and bulkier. If you're looking for increased protection above and beyond what soft armor offers, we have 3 series of hard armor inserts. A Series armor is made from our unique blends of metal alloys. Among these are the classic rifle-rated steel plates our company is known for, which have enabled hundreds of thousands of Americans to acquire high-quality armor at an affordable price. While often heavy, metal alloys exhibit many positive properties, including multi-hit capability, edge-to-edge protection, and the least backface deformation, where the impact of a round causes the side closest to the wearer to bulge inwards. At Armored Republic, we are constantly working to innovate the alloy armor industry, developing new strategies to reduce the weight of metal alloy armor while retaining its excellent protective qualities. P Series armor is constructed from polyethylene, or PE for short. These are lightweight plates consisting of many compressed layers of high-strength polymers capable of stopping bullets with minimal fragmentation risk. Light enough to float, P Series armor is strong enough to stop all handgun rounds as well as many rifle rounds. However, they tend to be more expensive and can exhibit some of the most severe backface deformation. The strike faces in our C Series armor are made of ceramic, the hardest midweight material used in body armor construction. While monolithic ceramic armor cannot withstand multiple hits due to its brittle composition, it's the only armor material capable of stopping an armor-piercing .30 caliber round. Due to their rigid construction, all of our hard armor series A, P, and C plates also provide effective slash and stab protection from edged weapons. Not all body armor is equal. Each material has its own characteristics that are important to understand when selecting your life-saving equipment. Our new series names highlight the 4 materials that we use to produce body armor products here in our Phoenix, Arizona facility, so that you can make a more informed decision about which type is best for your unique considerations. Within each series, our armor inserts will be numbered to indicate the relative performance characteristics of each plate inside that category. For example, our A1 plate is an entry-level alloy armor product, while our A2 plate is still alloy but with improved capabilities or features. When you shop online for body armor at armoredrepublic.com, you'll be able to use these new series names to intuitively sort through our many product offerings and locate the armor that best fits your needs.
A master called together a few young men of this generation and spoke to them, saying, "I gave your great-grandfathers a time of despair and poverty and global war. They were strong and victorious and built an empire greater than any other. But they were terrible fathers and raised entitled sons and daughters of rot who inherited everything through no courage of their own. To those rotten sons, your own grandfathers, I gave abundance and wealth and stability. But they pissed it all away on debauchery and sexual revolution, establishing many idols and slaughtering tens of millions of children in sacrifice to their appetites. One generation fought against the perpetrators of a great Holocaust. The next dishonored that victory with an even greater Holocaust of their own children. The children who did survive, your fathers, carried on the sexual descent of their parents into new madness and new disease, piercing and inking their skin like death-worshipping pagans as they did, establishing special days of pride to celebrate the debauch, slaughtering more children and castrating and poisoning others, claiming to be creators when they were destroyers, mutilating the young and calling it acceptance. All these generations I have judged, and am judging. Their madness now is only a taste of my wrath. The young men were afraid and asked the master why he had called them and why he was telling them these things. Because it is now your turn. I am giving all of this chaos to you, he said. Your inheritance is a world of crumbling false gods crowded with blind and mad worshippers. I am entrusting you with a world of empires built on cracked and heaving foundations. The time of your inheritance is near. You have only a little while to prepare yourselves. Seize this moment of chaos and build me a world of sanity and righteousness. When I return, I will judge what you have built for me. With so much rubble to work with, I expect great things. The master turned to leave, but the young men begged him to wait. How can we do this, they asked. There are hundreds of millions of unbelievers in our nation alone and only a few of us. Their master answered, saying, I am not a hard master. You will have the truth and wisdom if you desire it. And you may each choose one woman to help you. That should be enough. Go now and build New St. Andrews College. Carpe Chaos.
Across Politics on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. It's good to be with you. No sandstorm today, no high winds, and yes, we got Justifying Revolution, the author Gary Steward coming on the show today. So very grateful for him coming back after he weathered the high winds with us the first time. Did you know Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy called for defunding Planned Parenthood?
I just heard that a minute ago.
It's like, this is like
more.
Right.
More.
Yeah. I mean, just
why is the government paying for this anyways?
Right. Yeah. Well, when's the last? I don't know. Like, did Russell Moore, David French, have they been asking for these things?
I don't know.
I mean, I'd be curious for somebody. Maybe crowdsource that. But like, I mean, are Elon and Vivek? The Hindu.
A Hindu.
Oh my goodness.
And an
autistic.
And an agnostic.
Agnostic.
I mean, are they doing better work for us?
There's a judgment in here somewhere.
Right. Yeah. But we'll take it. We'll take it.
Yeah.
Winning.
Did you know that optimizing both body and mind will support spiritual growth and can help strengthen the foundations of church, family, and community? It's easy for both the hardcore gym rat and the chair-bound book lover to miss the holistic nature found in wellness of body, mind, and soul. At Mount Athos Performance,
At
Mount Athos Performance, we understand that true health integrates physical, mental, and spiritual excellence. Our product line is crafted with purity and sustainability and is designed to fuel your active lifestyle and your pursuit of excellence. Ascend the mountain with that music. With Mount Athos Performance, visit athosperform.com/FLF, athosperform.com/FLF, and use code FLF25 for an exclusive discount. Join us in creating the next generation of health, strength, and spiritual vitality. Story Real Estate, they're one of our sponsors.
Okay.
One of our corporate
Another music for them?
They got another one.
Money is a tool in the hands of the person who wields it. Money is good for the good it can do, which is why the folks over at Story Real Estate love empowering their team members to make fantastic incomes and, through that, a massive impact. At Story Real Estate, a six-figure income is not only achievable, but they have a framework that has achieved those results time and time again. If you're willing to learn, grow, and work hard, go to storyrealestate.com, click menu, and then join our team to apply and begin your path to six figures and a massive impact. We are really grateful to have Dr. Gary Steward finally on the show. He's husband to Amy and a father to their three children. He's also an associate professor of history and the dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at Colorado Christian University in Lakewood, Colorado. Dr. Steward has a bachelor's in history from South Dakota State University, a PhD in church history, and a master's in divination. Really? In divination? Really? Is that what they call it? From Southern Baptist?
We don't do that here.
I think it's divinity. From Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. That's like a little Harry Potter thing.
Whoa.
And a master's in historical theology from Westminster Theological Seminary, and is author of a number of books, including Justifying Revolution, The American Clergy's Argument for Political Resistance, which was published by Oxford University back in 2021.
That's big time.
Dr. Steward, thanks for joining us on Cross Politic at long last.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
I love the fact that last time, so when we tried to have this show last time, we actually had this freak windstorm.
Divination was happening.
Yeah.
Some divination.
And dust everywhere.
But Dr. Stewart, he stayed on the line.
I know.
It was really hilarious. He's like hanging out with us while we're like
walking outside
and stuff.
And
then,
basically called us wimps.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The thing that I remember particularly was like, he's like, you guys are calling it quits for a windstorm. I mean, if them redbacks have been coming, if those lobsterbacks have been coming to take your weapons, you guys would have folded like a cheap pack of cards.
He's laughing as he's hanging up.
Oh my goodness! Yeah. But I appreciate you coming back on and bearing with us, and really appreciate your book. I sent Gabe a picture of your book. I don't know, maybe a year ago.
Yeah, I think it was.
And so I blame Gabe.
You should have been coming on a lot earlier
for taking this long to get you on. But there's a whole bunch I want to talk to you about your book. But I think maybe the thing that I wanted to start with is it was striking to me that providentially the pastors in colonial America, or at least in certain pockets of colonial America, were already having to deal with political and religious tyranny, maybe like 100 years before the War for Independence. You've got this incident with the I don't even remember what town it's in. Was this in Boston? Where they have to the pastors have to, is this Cotton Mather? I can't remember, or maybe it's Increase Mather, but one of them is calling the people and saying, this guy is doing tyrannical things. We need to ship this guy out. Remind us of that story, Dr. Stewart.
Yeah. So, again, thanks for having me on. I think most people don't understand the context of the American Revolution, so they completely, it's so easy to misunderstand it when you don't understand the context. So in 1685, I think it was, the King of England consolidated the New England colonies into what was called the Dominion of New England. And setting up a royal governor there, Edmund Andros, and he was a complete tyrant. He forbade public meetings. He annulled the colonial charters with their charter rights and guarantees. He forbade things from being printed on printing presses. He seized all their land and charged exorbitant fees for them to apply to even live on the land that they had been on 2 or 3 generations, developing and farming and working. And just a complete tyrant. And when news of the Glorious Revolution in England reached across the Atlantic, when they heard that the king had been overthrown in England, 1688, the ministers basically led in imprisoning Governor Andros. It was very orderly. It was very deliberate. They put him in prison and they sent him back on the next boat going back to England.
Deportation.
And there was a book that was written. I think it was published in Boston in 1691 called "The Revolution in New England Justified." This is 1691, where they're basically describing this is what he was doing. This is what we did, and that book. The Revolution in New England Justified was reprinted in the 1770s in Boston again. They're like, we've seen this before. We've been resisting Stuart absolutism and their allies for a very long time now, and we know what to do. This is not anything new. This what's happening with George III looks a lot like what happened before. So, yeah, that's important context. They even call it, the Revolution in New England, 1691.
Right.
So,
I just think that was really remarkable to be reminded of that, because we don't usually hear that part of the story. And led by pastors, which is a big part of the thesis of your book. Yeah. Christian thinking, Puritan pastors, Protestant pastors, thinking biblically about freedom, religious liberty, the basis of our rights. But that then has been that marinates in the colonies, in this colonial soil, for almost 100 years. Yeah. And so I think that's really, really important part of what you're pulling out in your book, because this is not an overnight thing. This is not something that just all of a sudden, like in 1770 or 1774 or whatever, like
they got fed up.
They woke up.
They woke. Yeah, they didn't just
dump that tea.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that really,
and that's cross generational too.
Exactly.
And what happened in 1646? The Westminster Confession.
Right. Well, you had that was the English
In the
Civil
American
War
version, and the English Civil War.
Right.
And then you had the London Baptist Confession, 1689. I mean, there's like some real theology cranking out.
Right.
That's laying the groundwork, and it crossed generational lines.
Gary, your main. I mean, you're happy. Feel free to chime in on this, but I just also know that like a big part of the point of your book is to recover the biblical and theological foundations for the war for independence.
Yeah, I think I wanted to situate the arguments for resisting your government theologically and historically.
Yeah.
So many had argued that the founding clergymen must have been influenced by secular Enlightenment thought, because doesn't the Bible clearly teach, Romans 13, submit to your governing authorities? So this had been the assessment of scholars for decades, Mark Noll being probably the most preeminent scholar to argue that there must have been a lurch towards Enlightenment secularism, because they supported this war, which is clearly unbiblical. And I really wanted to understand, well, what did they have to say about it? Actually, how did they talk about it? How did they justify it? And I uncovered this whole stream of resistance to the government. It's the Puritan Parliament, which in the English Civil War will behead Charles I. It's under the leadership of the Parliament that James II will be overthrown in 1688. And then after that, the Stuarts don't go away. So the Stuarts don't just give up in 1688. They continue to be around. There's a Stuart uprising in 1715. There's another Jacobite Stuart uprising in 1745.
Wow.
They're still wrestling with this in the 1700s of, is resistance justifiable? Is it allowed in God's eyes? Who is our lawful monarch? Is it the Hanoverian line of the Georges, or is it this Stuart pretender? He was called. The pretenders keep hanging around. Right. So there's active warfare and conflict in 1745. And in Scotland, John Witherspoon is actually part of that resistance. So when you get to the American setting, it's they've been resisting absolutism from the Stuarts for over 100 years.
Right.
And this is just a part of that position, which was well worked out way before you get to the Troubles in the 1760s.
Also, Gary, I'm also going to ask a dumb question here, clarifying question. It should be short. When you say Jacobite, is that any connection to the Jacobins and the French Revolutionary side of things?
The Jacobites were supporters of the line of James, who was deposed in 1688, the Glorious Revolution.
Okay.
And Jacobin, it was kind of a slur. It became those who were opposed to the current standing order. So there is some connection there. They were the French the French were on board with the Stuarts. They were allied together. And so I do think there is some connection there. Most of the time there's slightly different tinges of meaning. It takes on a different kind of flavor during the French Revolution than it was in the 1600s. So there's connection there, but a little difference.
So Governor Andros that was removed, he was placed there by the king, correct?
That's right.
So then when they removed him, who did they replace him with?
They actually uncovered their old colonial charters. They some of them had went into hiding. I think it was in Connecticut. They had a tree that they stuffed the charter in. It was called the Charter Oak.
Wow!
Because they kind of drilled a hole and hid it in there, because they had these guarantees from the monarch. In writing with a royal seal. So these were very important to them. So they kind of just went back to the way things were. No more consolidated dominion anymore. We're going to have a colony of Massachusetts and a colony of Rhode Island. So they kind of just went back to their original, and each colony kind of had a different system in some ways.
When the war broke out, I think I got this initially from Russell Kirk. I think somewhere says that the American War for Independence was thought of or described by some as sort of the completion of the English Civil War.
Yeah.
And then as the war is breaking out, I mean, the king, I think, was the one who called it the Presbyterian Revolt. And so,
yeah. One of the advisors to the king, Walpole, he called it a Presbyterian revolt, understanding that the Scots had a big part to do with this, and
Let's go.
Scottish Presbyterians had a big part to do with this.
Yeah, well, even in this as you're describing the Jacobite and Hanoverian struggle. What you have, the back of that, of course, is you've got this divine right of kings theory, as opposed to like Lex Rex and Samuel Rutherford and these Scottish Covenanters and Presbyterians who are saying no. There's at least God's law checks everything.
Yeah.
And since God's law checks everything, it's not this absolute monarchy. There are other lesser magistrates, and there are other covenants that matter. I think we hear the Presbyterian revolt, and maybe sometimes it's easy just to think like, oh, this is like a denominational war. But it's like there was so much politics wound. There was a political theology wound together in this struggle, and so even in New England, part of the struggle becomes a concern that like they might be enforcing Anglicanism again, and Anglicanism is not just like this denominational thing political. Or worship style. Like we don't like them worship bands. It's actually that if we go under Anglicanism, then we're under the king again,
right?
Rather than this Presbyterianism, which implies a kind of constitutionalism or republicanism. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. There was a long-standing political and religious struggle against absolutism. The Stewart monarchy line, their mother was Mary, Queen of Scots, and she was raised in France, and she's very French. She's very Roman Catholic. She is, her conception of monarchy is passed on to her children, even though they're raised in Presbyterian Scotland. The Stuarts and the Presbyterians trying to beat it out of James, literally. George Buchanan, his mentor, they're trying to make him understand the Presbyterian political theology of Scotland. And of course, James is a Stuart, and he is coming from a different perspective. And he will write a book called The True Law of Free Monarchy.
Yeah.
Where he'll basically say, monarchs are called by God gods. They're God's lieutenant on earth. They are not to be questioned. They are not to be challenged.
Wow.
And James will carry that through. His son Charles I will, of course, carry it through. He'll dissolve Parliament. He'll rule as a autocrat for 11 years, where there's no Parliament even that's convened. And so this is like a long struggle. The Restoration Stuarts also, they'll carry on the struggle there. They'll depose the one. The Stuarts keep hanging around into the 1700s. Like this is the whole historical context for it's the British context. It is the great British political question that sets the stage for the 1700s in America. So you can't understand American history without understanding its British colonial history and the British parliamentarian history.
How did the clergy get such a high stance inside of public society?
Yeah, they're the public intellectuals. They're the public leaders.
Okay.
They're frequently preaching. So many before elections, they would have election day sermons.
Yeah.
To sort of instruct people as to their duty regarding the civil sphere. So there would be election day sermons. There would be when they would elect the heads of the militias. There would be a military election day sermon as well. That was very common. So the clergy were speaking into these things, and were really the leading public intellectuals of New England.
What would you say? I mean, you did a lot of work on this, but how do you summarize the biblical basis for preaching resistance to tyrants? I mean, what are some of the key texts and key doctrines that you see present in colonial America?
Yeah, I think many in the Reformed resistance tradition. So there really is one kind of Reformed resistance tradition. The persecution under Bloody Mary provokes a whole bunch of resistance writers like Christopher Goodman and John Ponnet.
Yep.
and Calvin. And then the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre that produces a whole other round of resistance writings. The war with the Stewards, so Lex Rex, that's provoked there. I think that the major point is that Romans 13 teaches us that in general, we have a duty to submit to our governing authorities. That is our general duty. However, in the rationale in verses 3 and 4, he'll talk about the magistrates as God's servant for your good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so the rationale for the command actually qualifies and helps us understand the extent of the duty in verse 1.
Yeah.
The scriptures often give us general duties that are not absolute, like turn the other cheek, sell your possessions and give to the poor. They're not qualified in the passage.
Right.
They're general duties, but they're not absolute. And the rationale in verses 3 and 4 of Romans 13 provide us with that kind of hint. Can you call Adolf Hitler God's servant for your good?
Yeah.
Can you call Bloody Mary God's servant for your good? And that has to be part of the calculus when thinking about governing authorities. Not everyone that claims to be an authority is God's servant for our good. There's illegitimate rulers. People can lose legitimacy by acting in certain ways. So it's a complicated ethical issue. In the Civil War, who is my governing authority that I'm most obligated to follow? Is it my local state authority, or is it the authority in D.C.?
Right.
Is Jane Grey the lawful authority, or is Mary Tudor?
Right.
Like, these things get really messy.
Right.
And they're complicated for those who are living in situations where there is question and disagreement about political authority.
Did you, a lot of this is come, this is a work you were already working on, presumably, but through, in the middle of 2020, in the middle of COVID, and a whole bunch of us suddenly cared about, who's my sheriff, who's on my health board, who's my mayor, lesser magistrates, or, suddenly we're finding out who they are. And there's a lot of discussion about Romans 13. I mean, what were you thinking about as you were working on this book in the middle of, lockdowns and, COVID regulations?
So I actually didn't do any of the work during that period. It was completed and done.
Wow.
There's nothing in this book that was driven by COVID or masks or mandates.
Yeah.
I was driven by this book by questions by some British friends who, would prod me and poke me a bit about how can you be, a patriotic American? Weren't you just all a bunch of rebels and rebellion? So it was prompted by some friends. Lee Gaddis is a good friend of mine in the UK, and he was really prompting me on that. And then also, but the main issue, I wrote the book to try and undercut this notion that, this is going to sound like a far stretch, that the Princeton doctrine of inerrancy was based on Enlightenment rationalism.
Right.
Interesting.
That had been the argument that Mark Knoll had put forward in America's God. And my big concern was what's going on with Witherspoon.
Yeah.
What's going on with the tradition of Princeton theologians.
Yeah.
And is their support of the revolution an indication of defection towards an Enlightenment rationalism?
Interesting.
That was the whole purpose, to try and defend the doctrine of inerrancy.
Interesting.
So it had nothing to do really with masks or COVID. Yeah.
So how does
surely it was applicable?
Yeah,
I was going to say, but yeah, surely you thought about
look
it.
at God. I want to get to maybe some modern application, but how would you? I know I think your book touches on this, but why was the American Revolutionary War, a biblical war, and a just war, and not the French Revolutionary War?
Yeah, that's a great question. Most people don't understand what is historically going on. In 1775, the British began firing incendiary shot from their ships into civilian population centers.
Wow.
There are two cities which are burned to the ground. One is Falmouth, Maine. The other one is Charleston, Massachusetts. 1776 opens with Norfolk, Virginia, being shelled with incendiary shot. This is winter along the coast, the Atlantic coast. And when that happens, the clergy begin arguing. The arguments shift, and the argument becomes one of self-defense.
Yeah.
It becomes, we are literally being killed. The Boston Port Act shut down the port, which potentially subjected a whole civilian population, an urban population center, to potential starvation. Other colonies began organizing and sending food into Boston. So most people just don't know the history. They think it's kind of a hissy fit over tea or something.
Right.
A hissy fit over taxes. You're like, no, there are civilians who are suffering extreme hardship with great atrocities being committed against them. The rationale at that point becomes self-defense. And there are a number of sermons that once these things start happening, they're arguing for the necessity, the causes of taking up arms. And must we submit to a government which is literally killing us? And the answer at that point becomes no, we must defend ourselves.
Yeah.
Wow, sermons are powerful.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's I'm just listening to you talk like this, and I'm like,
pastor authority too.
Well,
Pastoral public authority is powerful.
you know, I'm just when do we start losing that? Because I mean, you would imagine, like, if a pastor can get together and preach on something on Sunday and start a whole revolution, a war basically with another country, and say, no, we're done, and everybody's like, yes, what they said, throw the guys out there, shoot some bullets, let's end this.
The Black Robe Regiment.
The Black Robe Regiment comes into play. Like, that's radical. We don't have a place for that at all in this current mindset that what happens on Sunday morning services actually have implications into our governmental rule.
I think it speaks to the broader issue of the death of the field of ethics within Protestant thought. So you're right, but public ethics, private ethics, you got to go almost back to Richard Baxter to find some robust ethical body of work regarding ethical questions within the Protestant tradition. We've just let it slide in a serious way, much to our detriment.
So who's teaching the ethics now then?
Most Christians are adopting their ethics from the world. There's just a huge vacuum, and private ethics, public ethics, political ethics. We got a lot of work to do.
Does that mean there's another war coming up? And I mean, like, if you do this for so long, you're going to get, and to me, it seems like you're going to get another revolutionary war, and it could go the French way or the American way.
Yeah, the French, and I'd forgotten you'd asked the question about the French Revolution. You know, that revolution is really a true ideological revolution based on a secular humanist ideology. There's a manifesto, there's a slogan. I'm very much with Edmund Burke in viewing the American Revolution as almost a revolution prevented. Russell Kirk would call it that, a revolution prevented, not made.
Right.
That's a very conservative effect. They're trying to conserve traditional British rights and liberties.
Right.
The French Revolution is truly ideological. Yeah. There's a slogan. There's a manifesto. The American Revolution doesn't have a manifesto. Like, it doesn't exist. I see it as a very conservative event.
So that kind of brings me then to, like, I mean, I honestly, it's very helpful to kind of talk about the 1600s and then how you got to a revolution or American War for Revolution. What is happening today? Are we heading towards something? I can't see an America that kills 60 million babies a year divided like that.
It's not a year, but it's total.
Yeah, sorry. 60 million babies over 50 years. And either repentance happens or a revolution happens. Does that, my question make sense?
Or civil disobedience happens. I mean, I think we could distinguish between resistance and revolution.
Right.
So Francis Schaeffer's Christian Manifesto, basically on the very point of abortion, called for Christians to consider the godly Christians who resisted the government during the War for Independence.
Yeah.
So he explicitly invokes the War for Independence along the lines that you're suggesting, that perhaps we as Christians need to think about being resistant to the government where morality and ethics are at stake.
Back to your point about the conservative nature of the war for independence, the thing that it struck me when I read your book, and we were still in the kind of the final gasps of the COVID moment. Tyranny, yeah. But it was actually encouraging. I mean, in some ways discouraging because of how dark things have gotten, and particularly under the Biden administration. I mean, speaking of abortion, I mean, we have personal friends that are under house arrest for praying peacefully outside of an abortion clinic, and Biden's Department of Justice, came after them and convicted them of felonies for peacefully praying. I mean, just peacefully praying outside,
and singing hymns.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like that's not yet getting burned at the stake, but it's there's certainly it's gotten to a place where we are being persecuted for even just praying. We saw a video last week. We had Calvin Robinson on the show from England, and we had a video of a woman not like praying inside her head,
not even out loud, words out loud.
Not even out loud, and she's in London, and within like a certain number of feet or meters or however they measure things,
Planned Parenthood
of an abortion mill, and she's getting arrested.
Stop.
Oh, you weren't here.
You weren't here.
No.
Oh my goodness.
She's not doing anything. She's just standing there, and the cops are asking her, "What are you doing?" "I'm just standing here." "But what are you doing? Are you doing something inside your head?" I mean, it's like just absolute insane.
Well, Calvin had a friend that got arrested twice for doing the same thing.
Same thing. But I think that the thought that I had was, nevertheless, in the middle of the COVID moment, there was a pushback, and from not as many Christians as I would have liked, but a number of Christians. John MacArthur, after a little while of shutting down, came out and said, "No, we got to run church. We got to have church.
Yeah.
We're gonna have church." There were a number of other churches that stood up and paid fines and all the rest of it. We stood up here. Gabe was arrested in the middle of that for when we did a psalm sing at City Hall protesting our a renewal of a mask mandate. And the thing that I thought of was, I hope, I was thinking, I wonder if this might be our Andros moment. In that, like, we're beginning to like we've not been thinking about a biblical justification for resistance of tyranny.
Yeah.
We've not been thinking about a just war. We've not been thinking about ethics, like you said.
No, that's huge.
And so, but the only way for us to do it biblically, in order to have a truly conservative resistance, like the American War for Independence was, is we have to get these categories in our bones.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think
it will be a revolution.
I think it will be it'll be an ideological revolution, even if it's like a sort of a right wing, ideological revolution. I don't think we're ready for real strong resistance. I think, again, COVID was sort of like this little practice run of like, hey, you're going to have church? How important is church?
Yeah.
Are you going to open your businesses? How important is your business, your school? How important is it to have bodily autonomy and make choices for your own health, for your family? And I think that has woken a lot of people up, and now we have this Trump administration with people really pushing back in a lot of these areas. But I know that it's in order for it to be truly biblical, it has to take some time. Reformation is something that where the Word of God marinates in over generations, and then there come key moments that need to be acted upon. But it's not just reactionary. You mentioned the fact that this is a defensive war, Gary, but the other thing too, like even just that the no taxation without representation kind of mantra. Yeah. It took me a while. I didn't know this growing up. I just thought they were fussing about not having representatives in Parliament, I think, is what I thought as a kid. But of course, the part of the other, which they didn't, of course, they didn't have representatives in Parliament. Right. But the whole point was that the king was supposed to be the representative, and secondarily, they have colonial charters, which are like these covenantal constitutional documents from the king, which gives them the rights to have their own legislatures over their own colonies, which then have the right to tax them. Yeah. And so like their point was like, we have these constitutional charters, these covenants, with the king. And if he's completely ignoring them and just, this random government over here in Parliament is sending us tax bills, there's no end to what he might do to us. But the fact that they even thought that way tells me that we have a lot of work to do. I mean, do you agree with that, Gary?
I think we have, a lot of work to do in helping people think through these things and to develop categories. Again, that there is a general duty we have to turn the other cheek. There is a general duty we have to submit to our governing authorities. But we've never had to in the West, for a long period of time, we have not had to think through questions of civil disobedience and resistance to the governing authorities in the ways that we're having to right now. It's been a very sudden and quick shift in our culture, and it's kind of caught us flat-footed. But we need help. We really need to understand our own theological heritage. We need to read old sermons, and there's a lot of them. For this book, I really want to look at and try and categorize the arguments in every sermon in the colonial period and the revolutionary period dealing with this. And there's just such a rich wealth of people who are thinking through a rationale for weighing out, very much like you would weigh out a just war kind of theory.
Right.
What are the criteria for resistance? When do we resist? What form does it take? What is the potential good outcome we're hoping to attain? They're not simple issues, but we really do need help. And there's so many sermons that are, they've all been digitized or accessible. I try to basically give the back of the book as a bibliography where I just put them all in. All the reference information is there. And the Early American Imprints database has them all. You can download them for PDF, for free. You can read these things. So
yeah, that was something. So here's the book, Justifying Revolution. Get it.
Yeah.
Get it. Our friend Timon Klein. Do you know who Timon Klein is, Gary?
No.
He's I don't know where he teaches. He's an attorney, but that was one of the things that he said. He's recommended several times when we've talked to him. He said, read the colonial sermons.
Yeah.
He's just recommended that. He's like, if you want to understand colonial America, you want to understand how they were thinking, read the sermons.
Wow. Yeah.
So, that's an amazing recommendation.
Yeah.
Gary, do you think that, as I'm thinking about this in my head, I'm saying, wow, we have so much tyranny because we have no clergy. The clergy is right there at the forefront of stopping tyranny. And we have all these guys that are going to seminary and they have no understanding of the history that's been handed to them to protect the people. Yeah. Do we need to, I guess one place, where do we need to start in training our pastors? Do we need to have a particular course where they do go back and read the colonial sermons? Where would you recommend starting for some seminaries if they're saying, yeah, we need to resurrect this?
Yeah, I think in general, we don't do very good in training pastors. Again, the area of history, it's just not in the curriculum. We'll do a quick survey of some church history, some very broad outlines, but it's very piecemeal. It's cherry picked. You might learn about George Whitefield and the Great Awakening, but you'll never read any of his political sermons. Samuel Davies. Samuel Davies. He's a great leader of the Great Awakening. He has all sorts of political sermons.
Wow.
It's so understanding the thought of those who've gone before us, more historical theology. And again, the area of ethics, we need to think through these, the current ethical things that are hitting Christians today and are likely to hit in the next 30, 40, 50 years. We don't know what the specifics are going to be of the issues that churches are going to face, but we should anticipate what are some key issues. Certainly biblical anthropology, sexuality, but we need to think through what happens if a anti-Christian political entity arises, and what are we going to do, and how are Christians going to be taught and instructed?
I forgot. I tweeted out, I think it was the beginning of this week. Tyranny there's a direct correlation between tyranny and cowardly pastors. And the rise in tyranny and cowardly pastors.
How about just ignorant pastors?
Or ignorant. There's probably a big mix of both.
Sure.
And it's amazing to kind of hear you talk about these pastors and all their political sermons. I mean, that's
Right.
One of the reasons why we started Cross Politic in 2016 was because at least I know my upbringing, I felt like the church didn't, my pastors did not disciple me well on how to apply the Bible to theology, to politics and culture. And so I felt so behind, and I came to Moscow and kind of got this rush of, political application and cultural application that's not happening nationwide. I mean, I think 2020 woke up a lot of pastors and are leaning more into it for sure, but it's still a very small segment. I don't know if there's really a question here, but
it's a whole area of good works that we're to disciple Christians to be engaged in. It's not an area to withdraw from. Culture creation and political engagement. These are all realms that Christians are to be salt and light in, and not just flee from. The world desperately needs Christians who are speaking into these areas.
Why, maybe this is just another way of asking the same question over again. We'll just keep pressing.
Yes.
But
Pound it.
I mean, I do wonder, so how do you get, maybe it's just the press of persecution itself that forces the issues, but I mean, how do you go from a couple hundred years of pretty rich Reformation theology that's not just about soteriology, not just about theology proper, but is
political thought,
but is really regularly wrestling with political realities. How do we go from that all the way up? I mean, really to the founding of our country. Maybe 1800. I don't know, and then for maybe the last couple hundred years, it really dropping off. I mean, what happened?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I know there are some changes that take place in the First Great Awakening and Second Great Awakening. The emphasis on individual soul winning, individual conversions, a kind of a giving up on the Puritan vision of a godly society, a full-orbed godly politic and economy. There's almost a narrowing of focus, a narrowing of vision on individual salvation. That would be one thing. I think also there's just complete World War I just brings about complete devastation for those who are thinking that we're on the verge of a golden age. Yeah. And World War I just shatters that completely. And there's really a withdrawal away from really disillusionment and withdrawal away from that.
Where I've always thought that the Second Great Awakening did more harm than good, and I always thought the First Great Awakening was like a good, sound reformational movement. It seemed you hinted at that there were some problems that started coming out of the First Great Awakening.
Yeah, maybe just a shift in emphasis. There's New England as a Christian society had really kind of ended in failure, and there's such disillusionment and discouragement. I think there's some things that began in the First Great Awakening, the seeds of the Second Great Awakening. You see some of those things there already.
I remember, just remind me as we're talking about the Great Awakening, in your book, you mentioned George Whitefield as undercover agent. You remember this part? You guys know about that?
No.
Tell him, Gary.
Please remind me. I believe he didn't quite live to see the full what was going to happen, but he knew it was coming. He spoke to I think he gave some warnings to the churches about the plot to install Anglican bishops over them, and that the rights of dissenters would likely would come under threat.
Yeah, no, that was it. Yeah, it was just kind of a fun thing where he's like, guys, I'm because he's traveling back and forth as this evangelical preacher and having a massive impact in preaching the gospel and. But there was in passing in the book he notes that George sort of passing on information is I'm hearing them plotting that they do want to establish Anglican bishops over here.
Oh wow!
Y'all need to be careful and mindful of this.
Yeah.
And again, it's not just about we think a bishop be like, oh yeah, that's a guy who wears a funny hat and wears a robe or has a high liturgy, but it's no
has a political idea.
The Anglican bishops answer to the archbishop and the archbishop answers to the king.
Yeah.
And so there's a political reality that's in that.
Wow.
And so
That's funny. We don't even think that way anymore. We think that, at least it seems like this, we think that there is some sort of neutral area where, okay, us religious people can stay over here, and our religion that we think about doesn't have any sort of impact into political environments. Right? Yeah. But they thought of it as like, no, if we get an Anglican bishop, there's going to be a whole political structure that comes along with that. Right. We don't even have those categories anymore.
Right. No, well, I'd love to hear your thought on this, Gary, but I think, I don't remember who I read this from, but there's at some point reading about how Presbyterianism actually did affect our governmental structure. I mean the idea of representative government, the idea of sort of a mixed government. So Presbyterianism is actually the idea that you have clergy, sort of full-time pastors, and lay elders.
Right.
And together they meet together to form a session or a consistory. Yeah. And so you actually have lay representatives, that's the representatives of the people, and you've got the clergy, the pastors, making decisions together. Well, that's a mixed government, which, has a history going back to even Greek political theology. Yeah. But there's this idea of different levels of government, that there's a localism, that then sort of works its way up, kind of going back to Exodus 18, kind of rulers of tens, 50s, hundreds, thousands. But like that, I don't think people understand that these things are all interconnected. I mean, you're practicing for something, you're being discipled for something, and there's sort of kind of these top-down rule things that then if that's how you think and that's how you think you get things done, well, then you're going to end up having that in your government. You're going to think that's how we have to get things done. Or if you're, if you want to go pure democracy and you just want a majority rule, well, that's going to affect how things are done in your government. But at the founding of our country, there really was a heavy, not everybody was Presbyterian, but there was a lot of Presbyterian assumptions in the air that then impact, that polity then has an impact on why do we have separation of powers? Yeah. Why do we have a House of Representatives and a Senate? Why do we have these terms staggered and in different lengths of terms? Why are these things 4-year terms, and why are the judges appointed for life? I mean, those kind of things. There's sort of along with the Constitution, like that style of government is not entirely unconnected to the church polity that was being worked out in Geneva and then later in Scotland. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Gary.
You maybe don't want me to. I think you might be reading that back into our political system.
Really?
Separation of powers and these sorts of things are, you could make the connection, but you could also connect it to lots of other things in terms of the history of political philosophy and political thought as well. So I want to pour cold water on you though, because I'm the guest. So
Gary. You're in a safe space, Gary. If you disagree, we would be so hurt if you didn't tell us.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was eloquent though. I appreciate the presentation of that view. It was beautifully stated.
Well, I'm still right, but I don't have a PhD, so I probably can't I can't pull any rank here. But
got it.
So I'm curious.
I absolutely do think it's true, but I
well, Gary, what do you think it came from? Like, so how would you then describe it?
Well, there's British constitutionalism. There's colonial governing documents as well. There's Montesquieu, who's very influential in terms of bringing the mixed republic idea from Polybius to the founding fathers. There's a British common law tradition and a court system tradition. History's messy, so I.
But you don't think that the fact that you have a heavy Presbyterian presence in the English Civil War, where you've got sort of this collision between James and company, the Stewarts, and this Presbyterian tradition, this covenanter tradition. You don't think that Presbyterian polity is informing how they're thinking about checks and balances and separation of powers?
I think those ideas predate Presbyterianism. They predate Knox. You can see analogies. There's analogous kinds of ways of thinking about hierarchies and powers, but Presbyterianism starts with Knox, but you have a long political tradition. The English Constitution predates all that. So, sorry.
No, that's right.
No.
Don't buy this book. It's the worst book you could ever have.
Well, see, I
think common law. There's definitely a lot of influence from common law.
I mean, but I would say so. Presbyterian capital P is predated by these things, but not the notions of representation and covenant, which Magna Carta is an appeal to covenants and the common law. I mean, that's going back to certain feudal assumptions, and those feudal assumptions again have to do with personal relationships between lords, between representatives, between with certain kinds of common law setups in the church and in the state. I grant your point about capital P Presbyterianism that didn't exist until Knox, but I guess I'd still push back and say I think the principles of Presbyterianism were not invented by Knox. I mean, arguably the first 2 centuries of the church. I mean, even Roman Catholics will grant the first 2 centuries of the church was run by presbyteries, and the Episcopal rule is something that really we didn't see until like the late into the 3rd century. So it's like these notions of covenantal Presbyterianism. Calvin was going back and saying this is what the early church was doing. That's what we should do here. Maybe this is how we got out of whack, is because we had this imperial church hierarchy. And if you have an imperial church hierarchy, why wouldn't we see that replicated in our states? But again, I don't know. You think that's pushing it?
Well, I think, we'd agree that there's that Christian influence deeply affects Western political development. So we would agree on those points. That certainly Christian thought deeply impacts the development of Western legal and political tradition. So we should just say that we agree on that.
The best version is Presbyterianism.
Presbyterian. Okay, all right, we agree. Okay, we agree.
Let's end the show. Dr. Gary, you mentioned one thing here before we leave. You mentioned that New England was a failed Christian community or failed Christian region. What happened there?
Yeah, so those who founded New England had just a great zeal for God. They had suffered persecution. They had a godly vision for it. And Cotton Mather would talk about it was that sort of godliness made them materially prosperous. Yeah. And because they prospered materially, that basically that sort of ate away at the original piety and zeal that the first generation had. Yes. So in some ways it was so successful that it undercut the spiritual formation. I mean, the people who crossed the Atlantic to pull this thing off in the howling wilderness, they were the real deal. They were serious people. It's often hard to just pass that on to your children when their situation is totally different, the situation that they're in.
Isn't part of what happened, Gary, though, I'm going to say this and then he's going to say, no, you're wrong. You're wrong.
Yeah.
No, you're wrong. It's okay. You can say I'm wrong.
Put his book down. We're not promoting
there was actually, though, a vision of cohesion, which was, sort of you mentioned sort of a Puritan version of Christendom. I'm using the word Christendom. You didn't use that word, but like a vision of a coherent society that was under Christ. And so there was no area of life that was not under Christ, but something happened in that generation where some of that started kind of coming apart.
Yeah, I don't think there was like a theological shift or some sort of divergence. I think it was there was a real refining that took place under the days of persecution in England. Mm-hmm. So there was a kind of spirituality and vitality that just was lost. I think it was more of an ebb of piety and seriousness about spiritual things.
Okay.
That undercut the whole thing.
Do you not think that the halfway covenant had anything to do with that?
Well, the halfway covenant was really a response to the problem.
Right.
I mean, they didn't know what to do with the grandchildren of church members.
Right.
And because their parents didn't give evidence of adequate spirituality or an adequate conversion. So it was really an attempt to solve the problem. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
The longer he stays on the show, the more trouble he gets in. Yeah. We need to do this for another 30 minutes. I wonder what's really going to come out of him.
Right.
Dr. Gary went to Westminster and then also graduated from Southern Baptist Seminary.
He's kind of a conflicted fellow.
He's a halfway covenant.
He's a little schizophrenic.
He's a halfway covenant guy.
Yeah. Although I don't know, like he's a little touchy about the Presbyterian stuff. So I think we know which side he falls on.
Fell on.
I know. I hesitate to tell you that I'm a teetotaler as well. I know last time you invited me to stay for something in a psalm. I forget what that was.
Beer and Psalms.
Beer and Psalms.
Yeah, and I'm like, I could brew some Earl Grey.
Just so you know, I read your book with some bourbon and a cigar, so I don't know. Gary, best place to get your book is on Amazon, Justifying Revolution.
I believe so, yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Thank
really
you, sir, for
appreciate
joining us on the
very
show.
much.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much.
Thank you for your work. Very good.
If you're single, get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until tomorrow, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic.